Good evening, everyone. I trust you're all well, and thank you very much for coming along this evening by webinar, because it'd be hard to get to see me as I'm not actually allowed out. Well, at least not allowed out to the clinic. I'm an ordinary doctor, for those who don't know me. Those of you who don't know me, qualified 35 years ago in conventional medicine. I was brought up with a very alternative mindset by what would now be called an integrated doctor, my father, Dr. Rajindra Sharma. Marvelous man, very clever, knew a lot and taught a lot to me as I was growing up. I've been the medical director of several large organizations dealing with complementary and alternative medicine, and I now specialize in what is called integrated medicine or also functional medicine. And that's a whole new story. I've been asked by Canella, thank you very much, to give a chat about upregulating the immune system. And this, as we know, is a topical conversation, which I hope will turn out to be of benefit. Now, I should be able to push this button and move on to my next slide. There we go, things are working. Everybody is abuzz about coronavirus, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. I'm going to go as much into the positivity about what we can do for ourselves to protect ourselves from infections generally. This is not a specific talk about coronavirus. For that, you will need to infer, because at this point, we all don't know all that much about it. So I'm going to give a positive spin on all that we do know about how to deal with viruses. And I'm going to introduce some of the facts that seem to be coming forward with regards to what we might be able to do against the virus. But that is speculative at this point. That's more of a disclaimer than anything else. There's a lot of slides here, but I'm going to go through them fairly quickly so we've got time for questions at the end. But hopefully I will have answered most of the questions that want to be asked. So let's start, please, with this first slide, where it is incredibly important to keep an eye on the NHS website, follow that, read your local medical practice websites, follow that. It is so important that we do not waver from the advice that we're being given. There is a lot out there for and against all sorts of things. Anything you read against conventional attitudes at this point are not wise to follow. Stick to the rules, please. I put in a link, which I've put down as this is a very interesting take on the situation. Do please read it. It's an upbeat commentary on statistics, and I think worth a read for those who are interested in the background of viruses, health, epidemics, and what we are doing now and what we will need to do in the future. Of course, if anybody has a problem, they must contact 111 to get the advice for themselves and for others around them. However, there are a few points that I think we can particularly talk about with regards to the common press and information coming our way. Avoid speculation, it's often inaccurate. Bear in mind that the majority of us at this point are going to be fine. This is a nasty virus and it gets those of us who are already unwell, and by that it's generally seriously unwell. If you have a condition that is well controlled, you probably don't fall into that worrying category. But it's important to remember that you may meet people who are unwell. So whilst most of us need not worry, we need to be careful. If you're reading something that's frightening you, you're hearing news that worries you, stop listening to it, stop reading it, move away. I'm going to talk a bit later on about how stress and anxiety reduces our immune system. Although there are currently no effective drugs, we've got lots of work going on, lots of research from all over the world. We'll have to see how different authorities deal with experimental treatments. For now, do as you're told, listen to your doctor, and take some advice on how to boost your own immunity generally. There are no vaccines being developed. That may be a bit late for this round of a problem, but at least we'll have some protection in the future. For most people who get this bug, you're going to be offered treatments that are going to deal with you as if you've got a bad cold or the flu. That doesn't make this virus like a bad cold or the flu. It is more dangerous for those who aren't well at the moment. You can see there's so much speculation, but at the moment, don't overburden doctors with minor concerns, but do burden anyone and everyone if you feel you're moving down a bad path. And a bad path is best recognized by thinking of how you are, how you've been rather in the past, and whether or not what you're going through is worse than that. Particularly pay attention if you're finding it hard to breathe. Doctors in hospitals are currently coping. We need to keep it that way, and that's what self-isolation is about. And we are slowly but surely going to be developing herd immunity, which means we're going to be covering ourselves as we go forward. Talking about self-isolation to begin with, and again, these are going to be brief comments. You can always try and get back to me if you have additional questions. I've started this with a dramatic statement from 2001, when a study was done telling us all to be careful about those who are socially isolated, the elderly, the infirm, the unwell, the immobile, people who may have mental issues that keep them away from public conversations and public company. We can't ignore that, but we must, of course, stick to the self-isolation principles. But if you can, ensure that those who are isolated understand how to use social media. Make sure internet links are set up. Get in Skype and Zoom, we're on now. Keep talking to people. Importantly, not only for ourselves, but for others who may be dipping into a bit of depression or anxiety. Get out there, do stuff. Well, I say get out there. Get on and do stuff. Cook, decorate, yoga. There are online yoga practices. I've got one on the screen later. Do some gardening if you can. Get your houseplants in, delivered if you can, etc. Very importantly, keep an eye on underlying health conditions. Self-isolation, people may start to go down with problems that they've had before. We may have health problems that we know of that are currently controlled by our medication. Don't let those slip, because at the end of the day, this virus seems to hit those of us that aren't well. So to not be concentrating on other things whilst we are afeared of coronavirus is not the right thing to do. Talk it out. Positive conversations, please. One trick set up by neurophysiologists a while back, and it's a TED talk. I wish I could give you the reference, I can't find it. Look for 3 good things a day and share it. We've evolved to be anxious beings. All animals are. We're frightened by everything. Those of us that weren't, as we evolved, didn't survive. We didn't run away quickly enough. So our brain is very geared to finding a glass half empty. However, within 100 days of writing down something good that is different, don't use the same thing every day. Nice sunset. Doesn't work. You can have an orange sunset one day and a greenish sunset the next day. You'll run out of sunsets. But try and write down 3 positive things. What the brain is then going to have to do over and through this 100 days is learn that when a negative thought comes in, it will start looking for a good thought. And you do that simply by thinking at the end of the day or writing down, typing into your phone, the good thing as it happens to you, and then share it. Make it an experience that doesn't stay within the head. Spend a bit of time reflecting on your blessings, please. This is a very interesting time for many of us. We're going to have some time away from what we did. Use that time not to envy not being able to go out, to envy not being able to do, hopefully, what was an enjoyable job. For many people, there are times when they don't enjoy their job. Use the time constructively. Look at how wonderful things can be, even if we're not stuck on the treadmill. Try and get your senses, all 5 of them, wrapped up in nature. Look at the sunshine, smell the roses, touch things, get your hand in soil if you can. We're limited to where we can walk, but get down, put your hands on the grass, walk barefoot if it's not too cold. All of your senses are going to add to a natural input, whether these are positive ions or not. Doesn't matter about the science, it's good for us. Don't fight the fact that life has changed, please. These are new times, new revelations will emerge. Embrace them, I've written down here. Take advantage of stopping your negative behaviors. Smoking at this point is not a good idea. This is a bug that likes unhealthy lungs. This is a really good time to stop smoking. Move away from toxic environments. And I think it's important to ask if we were happy before. If you were happy before, great, you'll be happy again. If you now find yourself in a situation where you've moved away from stuff and you're finding yourself a little bit more relaxed, a little bit happier, more time doing stuff for you, stick with it. Stick with it. If you're worried, get counseling. It is not a failing to ask help, ask for help. Lifestyle medicine, another link, which I think is very worthwhile looking at this time. Looking at how our general health impinges upon our overall survival. It's a recent paper, very important, very simple, it's a bit scientific in places, but have a good look at it and understand that we are what we eat, what we think, what we breathe, everything around us, our environment. Think of ourselves, please, as a tree. Our branches are our symptoms, our characteristics. The trunk is what has got us to that point. We were once a sapling growing into this. The tree has roots. It's in the soil. The soil is our environment. One of our roots is our genes. But the other roots are our exercise program, our dietetics, our psycho-spiritual well-being. All of this is important. Please maintain optimum weight. Please eat well. Use this opportunity to get rid of other bad habits we may have. And have a look at that link to Adrian 30 Days of Yoga. There are lots of them out there. It's a good one. We're probably going to be in the house for the next 30 days. The key defense for all of us is to boost our immunity. You don't hear that a lot from doctors. We are taught a lot about physiology and biochemistry in our first years at medical school. We don't have a lot of it ingrained into us once we're in practice. But at the end of the day, people who are living into their 90s and 100s, despite their potentially smoking and doing other things, have got good defenses. They are eliminating stuff quickly. They are fighting well. It's logical, even if it is not highly scientific. Cleanliness. We're told about soap and water. Well, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought? We need to be washing our hands. We're taught about it in the medical field. We're taught at school, wash your hands. We've got sticky kids. They're always cleaning their, well, we're always cleaning their hands. Do it. Now is a really good time to go back to some basics. It does not have to be antiseptic. Many people are going to find, as they've been using their hand sanitizers, dry hands, flare-ups of eczema. We need the bugs on our skin. I'll touch upon that later. Avoid dehydration. Keep drinking. Don't overdo it. A couple of liters a day through a non-sweaty day, perhaps a bit more if you're exercising. Keep your mouth moist. Mine's drying up a bit. Keep it moist. You've got to keep swallowing the virus. It's getting to us through our membranes. If we dehydrate, our tear production reduces. We get dry eyes. Our nasal discharge diminishes. Our sinuses will dry up and won't be pushing out the viruses. Eat well. Nutrients are of benefit. Again, trying to find science about how each individual nutrient works is not difficult. We know what it does to our immune systems. I'll touch upon that in a few minutes as well. Get in those vegetables and fruits, organic proteins. Avoid the processed foods. Processed foods do what they are meant to do. They keep bugs away. The additives, the preservatives do just that. If you swallow them and your acid in the stomach and your alkaline digestive enzymes don't kill it off, break it down, they're going to kill off your tummy bugs as well. Sleep. You've got to sleep. Hours before midnight is a quote that is often used. Well, frankly, for midnight here, it's 1 o'clock in the morning there. Try and get a couple of hours of sleep, particularly when the sun goes down, well, the sun first goes down. So important for our immunity. I list a few nutrients there, and you'll see some numbers coming up. These are references. They're either at the end of the slides or on the slides. So those who are in practice and listening, thank you for coming along. You can read a bit about it. You'll have your own references, I'm sure. It's not something that I think those of you who are Joe Public need to do, but they're there. Fever's a friend. We spend a lot of time from aspirin through non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, paracetamol to a degree. It's not a big fever killer. Sorry, it's a good fever killer. Getting my metaphors mixed up here. Keep taking what it takes to keep feeling okay, but don't drive down your fever. There are possible benefits from far infrared and sauna. Very important, because this bug seems not to like heat. There's some negative press out there about heat is not going to cure this virus, probably true, but it doesn't seem to like it. So keeping yourselves warm, exercising, is probably going to help. It can't hurt. Nasal washing, not right for everybody, but saline nasal irrigation appears safe. There are a lot of papers using it. There's no reported serious adverse events except for those who shouldn't be using it. And that's sort of a bit of a balance in my getting out of making a disclaimer. If you've got problems with your nasal passages, it's probably not right to start washing them. But if your problem is temporary and it's arrived because you're bunged up, then it may well help to flush bugs out. Under instruction from practitioners who have some knowledge, you can even use topical disinfectants like colloidal silver or iodine. Do not do this, please, without clear instruction, though. I talked a moment ago about stress reducing immunity. There are a couple of references there. I'm not suggesting that meditating will cure COVID by putting up that little statement. It is a reminder that we are worrying about this virus and it's going to add to our stress response. If you start to feel anxious, as I said earlier, try and stop doing what you're doing and rethink. Have a good look. So good I've had to say it twice. Look at what's stressing you. Put things into perspective. Most of us who get this virus are not going to have a major problem with it. Those who are unwell will have a major problem with a potentially dangerous virus, although the virus itself is not the issue so much as the underlying condition that the virus seems to want to meet so that it can do its worst. I'm going to talk a bit about the tests that are coming along. In principle, the tests that have been used, looking for something called RT-PCR, are looking for the virus itself. I talk a little bit about what it is, but I don't think that's a big necessity. You can look it up if you're interested. The antibody tests that are probably going to be launched soon and will be able to be obtained privately, because it may not be that there are enough for the government to dish out through its arrangements with pharmacies. An antibody tests measures your IgM and your IgG. These are immunoglobulins. They are antibodies. IgM turns up quite rapidly in an infection, although there is always a lag phase between picking up the virus and developing the first immune response. You're going to have barriers, the primary immunity, and the last three slides on this show will talk a little bit more in detail. I may not have time to cover it, and I thought it better to talk about the practicalities rather than the science. But these tests that are coming up are important, and I'm going to explain why now. This is a chart that has come forward from a laboratory in Europe. You can see that the test which is going to be available is going to be a pinprick blood test. Incidentally, we often pinprick the sensitive part of our fingers. Use the back. It's not quite so sensitive and less likely to be applied to infective material. I'm never quite sure why we've always pinpricked the front. Think about below the nail bed, but not too close to the nail. Now, IgM comes up within the first 5 to 10 days after infection has come in. IgG follows on a bit later, but IgG stays positive potentially for years. And it's IgGs that are often the defense mechanism we have against infections that we had when we were little. These don't just float around constantly. They are formed by specific cells that are told to form them by memory cells. And there's a complexity to memory cells, T cells, B cells, plasma cells, and of interest perhaps to the academics, but not necessary to know about now. Suffice it to say, the tests that are going to come our way are IgM and IgG. If both are negative, you don't have the infection. Doesn't mean you don't have the virus. It may be that it's going to show up in a few days' time. If you've got symptoms and you've had them for a few days, a week, 10 days, and both these tests are negative, your symptoms are probably not corona. Repeat the test. If you've just started, you've just had the test, and then you have a continuation, test a week or so later. If your test shows IgM positive but IgG negative, you've probably got early infection. We've still got to see how accurate the tests are. There is a suggestion of two things called sensitivity and selectivity, or I've forgotten the word, I've gone blank. I've used it so often, but it'll come back. And if we find that the IgM is positive, we're probably up around the 90% security that this is what you've got. It may not be. Does it really matter? Not really, because you're going to follow through with the same things that you would follow through if you had a bad cold or you had a bad flu. You need to continue to self-isolate. If you weren't being good about it, you need to have started. Consider that you are now infectious and probably will be for 14 days. Talk to your GP, let them know. There may be other arrangements for us to tell people as we go forward, tell the authorities. The more the authorities know, the sooner we'll get out of the crisis, as they'll be able to adjust what we're meant to do. Ideally, it may be possible to get hold of the RNA tests, which are the antigen tests, because then you can see if you've still got the virus in your system. Whether that's going to be easy or not, I don't know. Watch this space. Some people may find that they've got a negative IgM and a positive IgG. Not so sure that'll be the case in the coronavirus issue at this point, because it's something that we've had in the past. Most people are going to have had this infection over the last 3 months, and the IgM should stay positive for that length of time. What we may find, more commonly than not, is both a positive IgM and a positive IgG. And this suggests that the infection may still be there. We're still fighting it actively, but we have now probably developed an immunity. Again, make sure you let any doctor that's involved in your care know what your result is, and keep an eye on who else to inform in public health. Before I go into the main structure of my talk, which is about our own immunity against viruses in general, I thought it might give people some hope and support to know that there are lots of treatments out there for people who do get the virus. Getting the virus may be represented by no symptoms at all, may be represented by a cold, sore throat, may show up as a bad flu type symptom, very achy, fevered, completely exhausted, bedbound. It's those for whom it's going to drag itself down into the lungs and cause damage down there. And that tends to be those who are over 79.5, that's the average age at the moment, let's say over 70, who may have a lowered immunity because those memory cells I mentioned earlier have diminished over the years. We make them when we're young and we lose them as we get older. By the time we get into our 8th decade, we're tending to not have many memory cells of infections that we've had, or cells that become memory cells when they first come into contact with an infection. Again, all a bit technical. Those of us that may struggle with asthma, if you're well controlled, it's not likely to be a problem. Those who've got poorly controlled asthma may have had lots of infections, and that may have caused some problems to their lungs, and there starts to be a slightly higher risk. But if you do find yourself short of breath, look at all the different things that are there that are currently used as antivirals. Are they going to be effective in SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus? We don't know. But there are studies going on around the world, and Mr. Trump announced the availability of one of those on this list, chloroquine. Quite how easy it's going to be able to get. It's certainly not licensed for use in this way in the UK. It's been used as an anti-malarial for decades with success, with limited side effects and risks. We're not prescribing it at the moment in this country on license. Quite whether or not doctors will be entitled to outside of hospitals, I don't know, and which drugs they may use is going to be based on the experience of the everly increasingly swiftly experienced doctors who are manning the front lines in our NHS. Bless them. There are certain references that people might like to look at. This is no way my saying these are cures for corona. These are just things that are going on and that may have got some evidence of efficacy for antiviral effects in the past. Now, what do we do? Well, it's important to understand that we're not sitting here defenseless. We've got lots of things that we can do to boost our own immunity. Whether that will make a difference against coronavirus, we don't know, but it certainly isn't going to hurt. We know that it helps people with other infections. People who happen to have good health tend not to get infections, as those who have bad health caused to a great degree by poor diet, lack of exercise, obesity, not doing the right things, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes. So we can clear all that out. But practically, we can also take things that will make a difference to our immunity. These are not specifically coronavirus, once again. Excuse my constantly pushing out the disclaimer. Probiotics. These are very important for our good bacteria, both as they are good bacteria, but they support our good bacteria. They have a direct effect on our immunity by sending out chemicals, chemical messengers that go to our white blood cells and tell our white blood cells what to do. They also kill things. They kill bad bacteria in particular. They may well ingest viruses and make them harmless. Specifically, a paper just published suggests that those patients with COVID-19 showed intestinal microbial dysbiosis. This is an imbalance. Now, whether the virus is causing that, probably not, but possibly, or whether it is just a small study that showed that those who didn't have good bowel bacteria had more COVID in their system. We don't know. But what we do know is there seems to be some association even with this virus creating the pandemic. Bottom line is, it cannot hurt to keep your bowel bacteria healthy for many different reasons. Vitamin C. Conventional attitude is that vitamin C doesn't make any difference to the prevention or treatment of viral infection. This is due, I feel, to a lack of evidence, which does not mean that it doesn't work. A lot of studies that are done are considered by many, I'm one of them, to be because we're not giving high enough doses to create the results that we would expect to see. There are quite a lot of studies, however, that do suggest vitamin C may make a difference. I've put in a quote there. Given the consistent effect of vitamin C on the duration and severity of colds in the regular supplemental studies, and the low cost and safety, it may be worthwhile for common cold patients to test on an individual basis whether therapeutic vitamin C is beneficial to them. Vitamin C is unlikely to cause you a problem. If you take too much, you're going to get a rumbly tummy and loose stool. You've taken too much. Make sure you take less. Find out your own bowel capability. There are some studies underway in China. These are not published. The results won't be out for months. But as vitamin C, taken correctly, is not a harmful compound, somewhere between 6 and 12 grams will generally not upset your tummy. If it does, lower it. If you have children, lower it. Not you yourself, give lower doses to the children. When the tests come back, if we find it doesn't work, you've done yourself no harm. I'm particularly interested in the fact that intravenous vitamin C is being tested. I put the reference number 12 there at the end of these slides. That may well be a therapeutic approach to consider in the future when the studies come forward. Many supplements will contain the nutrients that I mentioned on a previous slide. You pick a nutrient, zinc, magnesium, B complex, put it into Google, tap in immune effects, and very few won't have something or a horde of references to show that they're going to benefit the immune system. This is not meaning that it goes in and kills off SARS, CoV-2, one of the terms, or the main medical term for coronavirus. Use them, take supplements, don't overdo it, make sure you're guided, but they cannot hurt. You're just going to make your urine a bit more expensive at worst. Iodine is a topical antiseptic. It's the brown stuff that's painted on people, well, used to be painted on people before operations. When I was a junior doctor and assisting, we had lots of brown stains for days on the wards. Iodine is known to be effective. Therefore, do some inhalations with a couple of drops. Gargle with it at the right dosages. Do not do too much. Follow instructions. One of my colleagues has suggested coconut oil and iodine in a 10-to-1 ratio as a hand scrub. It's logical. You're putting iodine on your hands. The coconut oil is going to stop the hands from drying out. It will also keep the the iodine on the hands for longer. So use it if your sanitizers are causing problems to your skin. Better than nothing. Don't forget soap and water. Antioxidants, bioflavonoids, polyphenols. These may all be of benefit in viral infections. They're found in fruit and vegetables. And you can get good quality antioxidants which contain all of these, derived as much as possible from plants or derived in special ways. Make sure you use it. It can only be of help or harmless, provided it's taken at the right dosages. Beta-glucans, the plant extracts, they're found in high quantity in medicinal mushrooms. You can get them singularly, separately, in capsules. Follow the advice on these food supplements. They're not medicines. We're not trying to put them out there as medicines. And no specific trials on SARS has been conducted yet. However, Chinese, Tibetan, Unani, Ayurvedic, Eastern philosophies have beta-glucans as principal components of many of their immune system supporters and anti-infections. Olive leaf extract, got a lot of stuff out there on that for its general immune and antiviral properties. Nice and simple, easy to obtain. I've listed off a whole load of others. I'm not suggesting by any means that everybody should be taking all of these. I think that if people are unwell, they should get advice. But these are things that you can discuss with a nutritionist, a herbalist, an alternative practitioner, an integrated physician. Not tested against VARS, but they are tested against other viruses. Homeopathy, not everyone's cup of tea. If I wanted to attack any particular institution, food industry, the oil industry, petrochemicals, big pharma, I would probably have no problems at all in finding people who were in the business who would come forward and say, bad things go on in there. And yet, in 35 years of practice, to find a doctor who has trained in homeopathy and has practiced it, to move away from it. I know of scientists who have poo-pooed it, and I know of eminent physicians who have studied it and have written books against homeopathy. They're not generally people who've practiced it. So it is unlikely that homeopathy isn't being seen by the majority of doctors who use homeopathy. It is not being stopped. The use is not being stopped. And by talking about doctors, this is simply that many people who are homeopaths have seen the benefits and continue to use it. Whether they have other interests that allow them to compare homeopathy to other things makes them perhaps less likely to go, well, it doesn't work. It does work for homeopaths. But if you've got doctors who are homeopaths continuing to use it, it probably works. And here am I, 35 years in. It is rare for me not to consider homeopathy when needed. Best to have a prescription based on your symptoms rather than the basics. But I've written down some Thuja, Gelsamium, and a particular combination that may be of benefit in boosting immunity. Again, not specifically for coronavirus. So we'll have a look at the time. Probiotics, vitamin C, multivitamins, minerals, beta-glucans, iodine topically. These may be an example of a protocol with nutritional antiviral properties. I think it's worthwhile keeping an eye on that if you happen to fall into the category of the worried or of those who feel that they may have an underlying condition. Those who actually start to present with symptoms, bearing in mind that we are currently at our second peak of seasonal flu, and there's been quite a bad bug going around, at least in my practice, over the last 6 weeks, creating a cough. However, it's not dry, it's producing some mucus. People have got runny noses. That doesn't seem to be the symptom of coronavirus. But then when this started up, and for the first 4 weeks or so, I wasn't told about a lack of smell and taste as a symptom. That has now become apparent. So it may well be that those of us with runny noses and some sort of productive cough do have coronavirus. We may have a combination of seasonal flu, coronavirus, and a cold. If you've got something that is bothering you and it's persisting, don't hesitate to call up 111, ask if your symptoms are of relevance, what you should do. But you could step up and add in the medicinal mushrooms, the olive leaf extract, and do that for a while until you're feeling better. Or, if not, heading off to the 111. If you have worsening symptoms, it is not a time to play with the best guess of natural medicine. We've no idea if it's going to work against corona. Everything I've said is talking about antiviral stuff and boosting immunity generally. So get consulting with an experienced naturopathic practitioner, integrated doctor, or of course, good old 101. I made mention of first line of defense and our innate response. There's a slide here for you guys who are interested to read about it. And the second one, helping to talk about the basics and remind us of our early training in immunity, and to not forget that there is a lag between being contagious and antibody formation, which just goes back to the importance of following the rules that are being dictated to us at the moment. These are all the references. And that is a whip through of how I think we should be looking at this positively. Most of us are not going to have a problem with this. Those that do have a problem with it, it is not going to be serious for most and the majority. There is a sad and large number of people who are struggling. And for them, we are doing all this isolation work and keeping ourselves clear to keep those less fortunate than those that are healthy well. Do not think for a moment there are alternative angles that will resolve this problem. There are bigger issues that we will need to look at when this crisis is over. But for now, keep your immunity up. It will make a difference to your immune system and logically make a difference to coronavirus infection. And that is all I wrote. So if I can invite our host back into the into control, I can be told what next to do.
Hi there. First of all, very good. Right, so we'll be able to take some questions now, if that's okay with you, Dr. Sharma.
Of course.
Lovely. Right, so if everyone's worked out how to raise your hand, that would be ideal. If not, you can either pop these questions in the chat box, or just say, my hand's here or something like that, and I'll unmute you. I'll let you know who I'm picking. I'll unmute you and you can ask your questions.
I think I've pushed the right buttons to allow me to be seen.
Absolutely perfect.
So here I am.
All right. I'll let you know as and when they come through.
All righty. Well, it would seem that I've managed to answer everyone's questions,
It seems
which is wonderful. I'm all aware that we are due to be going out and clapping at 8 o'clock for our health, for the inhabitants of the health service. And I will certainly be doing that.
There we go. We have got one question from Midi Fairgrieve. You bear with me. I'm just going to find your name and unmute you. Hang on. Right. Okay, you're unmuted. Fire away.
Oh, thank you. I saw, I couldn't see the hand button where I saw it earlier. So my question is, Dr. Sharma, is that given that in a normal flu epidemic, generally a lot of people die, and maybe an average of about, 12,000 or 15,000 in the UK, why has the world gone into a completely different kind of protocol with this virus?
I'm going to whip back up to the first page of my talk and point out this very interesting take on the situation. I would prefer not to make a statement that sounds as if it's my personal view, because it's so easy in this particular time to say something that might alienate others who can't necessarily answer in this forum. The answer is that the world reacted as the world thought best. It took its lead, of course, from the isolational approach in China, and as it has spread, it has hit a country, Italy, that has one of the worst records of death from seasonal flu. There are many reasons why that may be, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but hopefully, in one sense, we are seeing the worst that it will be for any country in Europe, now the epicenter, based on what's happening in Italy. There are Eastern countries, if we can be confident about what we are hearing, and that is a difficult thing to say because I'm not sure that I can trust things that we can hear or read about from the so-called Western society. But it would appear that countries that have utilized smartphones to track those who've had the infection and see who they were in contact with, and creating the self-isolation rule for those people, as well as those who were ill, has had a good effect. Only time and statistics will tell us whether it is a better effect than this complete lockdown that is hitting this country and other countries in Europe at this moment. So that is an edgy way of my answering a more philosophical and epidemiological question than I feel my remit to discuss immunity is. Have I?
No, you haven't answered it at all, because you know, from where I can see it, most of the people dying are already on their way, and that's the case with seasonal flu. It's a sort of natural culling, and I hope this isn't offensive to anyone. It's just, you know, coming from a kind of nature point of view. So why, in a normal flu season where far more people die, do we not go into this kind of lockdown? Why are we going into a lockdown over this, which probably will turn out to be less deadly?
I think perhaps I can answer that. If we look back over our recent media revelations about how our NHS does not cope with seasonal flu, and in a bad year we see people on beds in corridors. That may well be the case every year, and has been, for an NHS that I think most of us, including those in charge, agree is not able to cope at times. If you add in what may not be, as you say, as aggressive in death numbers, on top of that, there lies the problem. And you're suggesting that we are there is overkill for this problem is an acceptable viewpoint, and not one that I'm going to disclose whether I share or don't agree with. What I am going to say is that currently the attitude of self-isolation has to be followed, because if there is a better option, we don't know it. And had the Chinese followed a different avenue, then perhaps other countries would have followed a different avenue. But they didn't, which left those in a position of power with little choice. Because if they hadn't followed what seemed sensible and things had got worse, that would have been disastrous, not only for those higher number of people who died and all their relatives and friends, but also for the politicians. They did exactly what they had to do based on the initial outbreak. Whether it's right
I'd just like to make one point, and I agree, you're not really pinning your colours to the mast for obvious reasons, but I'm a counsellor, and I work with so many people who are going out of business and losing their livelihoods, and it's not really squaring the circle of how dangerous, if you want to even use that word, this virus is, compared to how much suffering is going on. And I can even mention many people on my street who are self-employed, and they're living week by week. And this is all over the world, that businesses and families and people are being kind of annihilated to I'm really unsure why.
I think we're going around in circles here, because I'm trying to sit in the middle. We don't have the opportunity to have somebody who is more of an epidemiologist who may be listening in, counteracting your considered view. I have to stay in the middle, because I think it's right to stay in the middle at this point. I think that if you read that article, you will find arguments for and against, and I would encourage everyone to do so. What I'd like to do in the time remaining, perhaps, if it's all right with you, is to flick back to the more positive aspect of what we can do in the current situation. May we do that?
Definitely. Yes. Thank you.
Bless you.
Okay, right. Moving on to the next question. Thank you for that. Bear with me 1 second. Right, who have we got next? I've got ING Manco is all I can read it at the minute. Right, I've unmuted you, so fire away. Oh, nothing for the minute. We might have to come back to you. Actually, hang on. She's written it in the chat now. She's written, COVID-19 has a much more contagious rate, double that of flu. Is that correct?
In natural medicine.
Sorry, Dr. Sharma, you're just at the start of it. You were just muted for a minute.
All right, I'll say that again. I'm going to answer this not as an epidemiologist, the question being, or the statement being, that COVID has a much more contagious rate, double that of flu. Is that correct? I'm not an epidemiologist. It is higher than double. It is a contagious bug. The problem with discussing contagion is that you can have lots of things that are remarkably contagious that are not dangerous. You can have things that are not at all contagious that are highly dangerous. So you've got to balance it out and not be frightened or worried, as the previous caller was saying in her role as a counsellor and the fear that this is engendering, to consider that contagion risk is not great. There is a marker called RO, and the marker is a calculation based on infectivity. Influenza is 1.4 and coronavirus is 2.4. It may be different now. Those are the figures I saw. Most people through the flu season won't get flu, whether we all get it and don't know it, or whether in fact most of us come across it, kill it off with our innate immune system, so it doesn't really get in, so we never trigger our antibody response or not. But nevertheless, there are several 100,000 people who will get it, and in a bad year, we can have 10, 13,000 people dying from seasonal flu. The contagiousness of the coronavirus at 2.4 is far, far greater. It is not just a doubling. You can pass this bug on to 10 people, and after a short while, you can have it spread to tens of thousands due to the communication that that person might have without lockdown. So don't worry about whether it's more contagious or not. It is. It doesn't really matter. We're doing everything that we should to avoid it. All righty.
Lovely. Right, we've got another question from Susie Grant. I'm going to unmute you, Susie. I'll give you the chance to ask it yourself. If not, I'll read it out from what you've put in the chat.
Hello. Oh, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Hello, Susie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I certainly can. Thank you very much. That was very informative and balanced. Thoroughly enjoyed it, especially the please let's all stop worrying and stop being stressed by it. says someone
Okay.
who suffered from terrible insomnia last night.
Indeed.
I'd seen a very interesting article recently sent to me by my brother in New York, by an expert, and I trained with Andrew's mum a long time ago, Barbara Wren, and both are of agreement that mucus in the diet, or mucus forming foods in the diet, can exacerbate a virus such as this. This was the premise of the article I read. What do you think, as far as I've certainly knocked dairy on the head big time? The rest of my diet's terribly healthy anyway.
Okay. I would prefer it if Barbara were in the conversation, Barbara Wren.
I'd love her to be, yes.
Who was was one of my early tutors, and I have the highest respect for. From a medical perspective and a physiological perspective, mucus is one of our first lines of defense. It is part of our immune barrier, our innate immune response.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this means that when we get a viral infection, the common cold, the body's defense mechanism is to trigger mucus production from the mucous membranes to create a barrier to stop the virus getting in. Mucus also contains an immunoglobulin, an antibody called IgA, secretory IgA. This is particularly useful against organisms like bacteria, yeasts, and funguses, but it is part of the warning system. As our secretory IgA levels rise, it will trigger, through the production of chemicals called cytokines, information to go to other immune cells. So my feeling would have been that mucus is probably a good thing. Secondly, this infection seems to be characterized by a dry cough, at least one of its symptoms. So the question is the virus blocking mucus production? And if so, is it doing it because it's a good thing not to have mucus as far as the virus is concerned, or is it just a sidearm, one of the things that happens that is not particularly part of the virus's success mechanism? Your particular question that you typed in was involving avoiding mucus-forming foods.
Stickiness and stickiness and phlegm, and foods that we know affect the bowel.
And that, I think, is a flip side, and perhaps what Barbara Wren was getting at, is if the mucus is too thick, if it's sticky, then of course things that you want to swallow or blow out may well stick and stay there. More chance of penetrating into the membranes and then into the system via the bloodstream and the lymphatic system. So it's about keeping mucus runny, and steam inhalations will do that. Steam inhalations with a drop of iodine in at the right proportion may well allow iodine to settle into the mucus and actually act as an antiseptic. Water, therefore, keeping yourself hydrated, because as we produce mucus, and think about it, we make a lot of mucus in the gut. We have 30 feet of gut, all lined by mucous membrane. We put out a large amount of fluid through the day, through the gut, through the sebum in the skin, separate from the sweat, from the production of saliva that then gets swallowed. The colon absorbs that water back in, which makes our stool firmer, but nevertheless, we have this insensible loss, which means that we must be drinking about 1 litre to 1.5 litres a day just to maintain the status quo. So, coming back to your question, I would argue that taking mucus-forming foods like dairy produce, and to many grains, gluten and gliadin may do so, alcohol will trigger mucus. Taking those in moderation, if you don't have a history of a problem with mucus, is more likely to be doing good than harm. Where the problem lies is if you have, let's take
I'm
asthma.
sorry, I lost you. I lost you. The dog was creating
Okay.
outside. Yes,
Well,
yes. I think. Sorry. I think I've got the article up now. It was a Chinese practitioner in New York. What he was getting at, which makes absolute sense with the training I had from Barbara, is to avoid foods that promote stickiness in the phlegm. The sorts of foods we were encouraged to reduce for a much healthier colon. Things like junk food, too much dairy, sweets, pizza, pastries, bagels. So basically, you know, a cleaner diet.
yes, I should have mentioned sugars as a big no-no
Absolutely.
in excess for anyone. But ideally, everybody should know what their tolerances are of the foods that they eat. And having talked about not drinking, here's my vitamin C going down.
Yeah, I need some water.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I missed the first bit, but it has what I've said made sense as an overall simplistic view.
As a simplistic view, those who have trouble with mucus before
Yes.
this virus came along need to be wary. Those who have thick mucus, check that you aren't creating that through not drinking enough. There are, of course, conditions. Cystic fibrosis is probably the most known and one of the worst. Thick mucus, there's not much that can be done about that. Therefore, yes, for conditions or people who have problems with thicker mucus, try and dilute it down and try and avoid it. For the rest of us, don't start cutting out things that are part of keeping you happy.
And healthy, yes. Good point. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to answer a couple of questions as the mic is on for me that are coming through, because I think we're now running past our hour. And I just thought there are a couple of questions that I could answer quickly. I was reading from a homeopath, a naturopath, who said that if we take antivirals, it doesn't give the immune system to support us and begin to fight infections. It depends what you mean. If you take antiviral drugs, there is a theory that your body will think that the virus was killed. This is the same with antibiotics, that the virus was killed when the body had only kicked in, let's say, 50% of its effect. Therefore, the body might learn that it doesn't have to go very far to get rid of the infection that just was there and then suddenly disappeared. It's theoretical, though. It's theoretical mainly because nobody has ever done a study to find out whether the immune system will respond less if you take antibiotics or antivirals. I think when talking about antivirals from a naturopathic point of view, you're not so much attacking the virus, although there are a lot of herbalists who would say, look, we've got compounds that will destroy the biofilm, the protective coat around a virus, and there are herbs that may go in and interfere with RNA and DNA, the RNA in viruses. That's a very big and complex subject. But I'm not a big supporter of antiviral agents unless specialists say it's useful, and that for this condition in particular, but in general. So that's just a personal view, and I'm not knocking antivirals prescribed by doctors at the right time. But I think the question may well have been to do with natural antivirals, and that I think needs to come under the heading of speak to a herbalist. One other question here, castor oil packs benefit lungs, sore throat symptoms, etc. Again, a poorly researched area, but the research that's been done certainly seems, and certainly traditional long-term use of castor oil as a treatment is encouraging. What we do know is that there is some suspicion that the COVID-19 doesn't handle heat very well, and most of us feel a bit better if we break through a fever. So heat seems to help our immune system. I'm not going to talk specifically again about COVID, but castor oil packs certainly will help areas that you can get the heat into if it has an infection of any sort, because heat will activate the immune cells. So those are a couple of quick questions. I don't know. Firstly, thank you all for listening. Please don't feel rude if you have to head off. I'm happy to hang around for a little bit longer. And if Brad is still listening and doesn't need to dash off himself, I'd be happy to take a couple more questions if they're there.
Yeah, still here, fine by me. Let's see what's next on the list. Right. Okay, so there's a question from Jay. If you're still here, I'll unmute you, give you a chance to ask it properly yourself. If not, I'll read it out from the chat. You're unmuted, so far away.
Would you like to read the question out, or did you say it was from Jay?
It was from Jay, yes.
Okay, I've got one here. Are you suggesting everyone to have the COVID-19 vaccine once it's released? Okay. Wearing my conventional medical hat, and also to a degree my training in naturopathic medicine, vaccines are invaluable. The principle of vaccination is unquestionable. It is an artificial way of creating an immune response, and the human and mammalian survival, I don't know much about non-mammals, is dependent upon our immune system reacting as it does to a vaccine. The question marks that are raised with me with my naturopathic hat on are not reflections that are mine, they are reflections that are out there. And that is concerning some of the compounds that go into the vaccinations to allow the vaccine to have a shelf life or to activate the vaccine. There are compounds put into vaccinations that preserve it. That may not be the best thing to go into the skin if we take the vaccine through an injection. Comes in there called adjuvants that specifically aggravate the local white blood cells that then think that there is something very nasty in, so that it has a bigger effect on the bit of dead, or what's called attenuated, virus. An attenuation is where you stop the virus from multiplying. So arguably it's still alive, but it's not going to multiply. Not all vaccines, of course, are against viruses. However, cutting the technical part, putting the technical part aside, you need to talk to your own GP. You need to look at your own health. You need to question whether an adjuvant, something that will aggravate your immune system, might be an issue to you. Do you have an overactive immune response? There's no studies out there that suggest that vaccines are particularly harmful. People can react, however, and they do react from a conventional point of view. From a naturopathic point of view, there are a lot of stories out there. Dr. Wakefield's story with regards to MMR is the most well known. You need to read his book to get his side of the story. You need to read conventional press that disproves his situation or his beliefs. Again, I'm on the fence because I think that such questions do not help large blocks of public health and worldwide health. There would be far more deaths without vaccinations. There'd be far more illness. The health systems of the world would just not survive as they stand without vaccinations. But that doesn't make it right for everyone. So you need to speak to people who know you and have a medical openness to the question. Most people won't find that in their doctors because we're trained in the benefits of vaccination. So it is not a simple question to answer, I'm afraid. And you would have to be my patient for me to ask if it's right for you. So in answer to your question, are you suggesting everyone should have the COVID vaccine. Everyone needs to look at themselves, discuss it with their primary health carers, and that's the answer.
Lovely. Right, so I've got a question from Lindsay. I'm going to unmute you, Lindsay, now. If you don't speak, I'll just read it from the chat.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Yeah, you mentioned earlier on something about iodine, and I thought you said don't do anything with iodine without consulting your practitioner. And then I thought you said a bit later on it's okay to apply some topically, and I think I might have heard you say into the nostrils, but I couldn't quite remember what I'd heard you say about that.
I said that one of my colleagues is suggesting that putting the right amount of iodine, and it rather depends on the strength of the iodine solution that you have, into a mug of water and using it as an inhalation. Under no circumstances should you be applying iodine to the nostrils, and if that's what I said, I withdraw it uncategorically.
I'm not sure that's what you said. I was just wondering, but I thought you did say that it could be applied topically.
Well, we know we used to apply iodine as a brown solution over a patient's body before we cut the skin to operate. It's been a long time since I've been in an operating theatre, and I'm not sure whether or not iodine is still the main antiseptic. I suspect not. There are a lot of chemicals out there now that are probably used instead. But I'm pointing out that for millennium, certainly for centuries, iodine has been used as a topical antiseptic.
Yeah.
It has not stopped being an antiseptic. And although there may be other chemicals that can be used, the risk of iodine topically is going to be very limited, provided it is used wisely. So dashing out, grabbing a bottle of iodine, sniffing it, absolutely not. Going out, putting a drop or two into water and using it as an inhalation, provided it's not astringent and causing any sort of discomfort, in which case dilute it down, fine. There's no reason why a drop of iodine in half a mug of water used as a gargle should cause a problem. Don't swallow it, spit it out. But those people who have thyroid problems, hypothyroidism, will have read without a doubt that iodine is vitally important to the production of thyroxine. So a small amount of iodine is not toxic. It's a necessity. So there's nothing to be overly worried about. My problem is in a public forum talking very generally about something as absolutely safe is not wise. So for any confusion, by all means, have a look online, look at solutions that are coming from, look at comments that are coming from professionals, check the credentials, and follow through with it. The one or two drops of iodine in 10 drops of coconut oil. So sensible. You are creating, you're applying a healthy oil to the skin with an antiseptic in it. Logical. If you react to it, and many people do react to iodine, you'll know about it. It'll itch, it'll hurt. Don't do it. Stop it. There's no simple answer to anything, I'm afraid, and I'm sorry to be hedgy. But yes.
No, that's all right. I don't mind. I read Dr. Myhill said get a salt pipe and inhale iodine 15% into the nostrils, and I just sort of wondered what you would make of that. But it sounds like you think it might not be advisable.
No. Well, yes, but no. Yeah, if you Sarah Mile is one of my most important tutors in my career. If she says it's safe, I very much assume it is. I would need to see what was written and quite what the frequency is. But please be careful that people, we do have people who are sensitive to iodine, and the simple way to try it is try it topically. If it causes any sort of rash or irritation, you can't use iodine. If you use it and it doesn't bother you, and you use it as an inhalant through drops in water, gargling with it, a dilute solution, remembering that we eat iodine, we need iodine. The amount you put in is not going to be toxic. It comes out of the system very quickly. You can, however, poison yourself with anything, and you can certainly poison yourself with iodine if you take too much. So, about balance, and if Dr. Myhill recommends a particular iodine technique, I would absolutely back and support it.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks very much.
All righty. We're coming up to hand clapping time. So I'm going to take my leave, if that's all right with everyone. My email address is available. I have a very large and busy practice. I'm dealing with an awful lot of things that are going on. I will do my very best to get back to questions fired in at me. It may take quite a while though. Please be patient, and if it's urgent, ask people closer to you, or you can always call up and set up a phone call with me. I will have times to answer questions, but again, I think most doctors are busy, doctors in my field equally so. So bless you all. Thank you so much for being part of tonight. I've learnt a lot by the questions and the answers and the way I answer them. Perhaps I'll become a little bit braver and more adamant to some of the questions I'm going to be asked. Have a very good evening.